Bruce Lee cornered by 3 bodyguards. You'll experience real violence now. Ended in 12 seconds. 12 seconds. That's how long it took for 3 men to realize they had made the worst mistake of their lives. Hong Kong, 1967. A private club in Kowloon, 3rd floor behind a door with no sign. The kind of room where problems were solved permanently. Where men walked in standing and were carried out broken. 3 bodyguards stood waiting. They had done this before dozens of times. They knew how it worked. The target enters, the door closes, and then comes the part that no one outside ever hears about. They were good at their job. Efficient, ruthless. But tonight they were waiting for Bruce Lee, and not one of them understood what that meant. The invitation had come wrapped in silk. A meeting with a powerful producer. Discussions about a film deal. Opportunities for the young martial artist. Making waves since his return from America. It was professional. Polite. Completely false. The truth was simpler and far uglier. Bruce Lee had become a problem. He had humiliated a martial arts instructor with connections to people who did not tolerate humiliation. He had rejected offers from studios that expected obedience, not negotiation. He had walked through Hong Kong's film industry like he owned it, and certain men had decided to teach him otherwise. The producer who arranged the meeting was already gone. He had never intended to be there. His only role was to deliver Bruce Lee to that room, to those 3 men, and to whatever happened after the door opened. Bruce stepped inside, alone, unhurried. He stopped. The room was small. Too small for coincidence. 1 table for chairs. No windows that opened, and 3 men positioned in a pattern he recognized immediately. 2 flanking wide, 1 centered and back. A containment formation designed to cut off movement. To overwhelm, to leave no escape. The oldest of the 3, lean, calm, with the steady hands of someone who had inflicted pain so many times it no longer registered as anything but work, gestured toward an empty chair. "Sit down, Mr. Lee." Bruce did not sit. His eyes moved once across the room. Distances, angles, the slight bulge beneath one man's jacket, the weight distribution of the other 2, both leaning slightly forward, ready to spring. "We need to discuss your future in Hong Kong," the old man continued. "You've made powerful people uncomfortable. You've shown disrespect to those who are owed respect. And now," he paused, a thin smile, "now you're going to experience real violence. Not the kind you teach in your little schools. Not the performance you do for cameras. Real violence, Mr. Lee. The kind that changes a man forever." The 2 larger men began to move. And in that moment, in the space between threat and action, something shifted in the room. Bruce Lee did not retreat, did not raise his hands in defense, and did not show a single trace of fear. Instead, he smiled. "Then let's not waste any more time." What happened next lasted exactly 12 seconds. It was never officially recorded. No police report was filed. No hospital records exist under the men's real names. But the whispers spread through Hong Kong's underworld like wildfire. From the stuntmen, from the drivers, from the waiters who heard the sounds through the walls. 3 men entered that room, ready to break Bruce Lee. 12 seconds later, only 1 man walked out on his own legs, and nothing in Hong Kong was ever the same again. The first man moved like someone who had never been stopped. He was the largest of the 3. Thick neck, heavy shoulders. Hands that looked like they had been designed specifically for breaking things. He came straight at Bruce with the confidence of a man who had ended dozens of fights before they truly began. A rushing tackle meant to drive Bruce into the wall. To pin him, to make the rest simple. It was a strategy that had always worked, for exactly 1.5 seconds. The room was filled with the sound of his footsteps, the grunt of exertion, the rush of air as 200 pounds of muscle hurtled forward. Then came the sound that changed everything. A single sharp crack like a wet branch snapping. Bruce had not retreated. He had not sidestepped in the way most fighters would, creating distance, buying time. Instead, he had moved forward into the attack, closing the gap so fast that the larger man had no time to adjust. The strike was a straight punch to the throat. Not a dramatic wind-up blow, not a theatrical technique. Just 5 inches of explosive movement delivered with a precision that bordered on surgical. The big man's momentum carried him 2 more steps before his body understood what had happened. His hands flew to his neck. A horrible gurgling sound escaped his lips. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed sideways, gasping for air that would not come easily. 3 seconds had passed. The second bodyguard was smarter. He had seen what happened to his partner and he did not make the same mistake. Instead of charging, he circled right, creating an angle, reaching inside his jacket for something that glinted briefly in the low light. A knife. Short blade, the kind designed for close work. His movement was practiced, professional. He had used that blade before and he knew how to use it again. A quick step forward, a feint to draw reaction. Then the real attack, a short, hooking stab toward the midsection. Bruce did not flinch at the feint, did not react to the false movement at all. His eyes stayed fixed on the man's center mass, reading tension rather than action. When the real strike came, Bruce was no longer there. A small pivot, barely 6 inches of lateral movement, and the blade passed through empty air. In the same instant, Bruce's left hand seized the man's wrist. Not grabbing, but redirecting, using the attacker's own momentum to pull him off balance. What followed was so fast that witnesses would later struggle to describe it accurately. An elbow strike to the jaw. Not swung, but driven. Short, compact, devastating. The man's head snapped sideways before he could fall. Bruce's right hand had already taken control of the knife arm, bending the wrist at an angle that human joints were never meant to accommodate. The snap was audible. The scream that followed was cut short by a knee to the solar plexus that emptied the man's lungs completely. He hit the floor and did not get up. 7 seconds. The oldest bodyguard, the one who had delivered the threat, the one with the calm eyes and steady hands, had not moved from his position near the back of the room. He had watched everything, and now, for the first time, there was something in his expression that had not been there before. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The understanding that he was facing something he had never encountered in all his years of violence. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately. "I have a gun," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a tightness beneath it. "This doesn't have to continue." Bruce stood in the center of the room, breathing evenly. His posture relaxed in a way that seemed almost impossible given what had just happened. The 2 men on the floor groaned and writhed behind him. He did not look at them. "Then use it," Bruce said quietly. The older man's hand hesitated inside his jacket. "You're fast," he said. "I've never seen anyone move like that. But no one is faster than a bullet." Bruce took 1 step forward. "You're right," he said. "But you have to clear the jacket. Draw. Fire. That's 4 movements. Another step. I only need 1. The distance between them was now less than 8 feet. The older man's jaw tightened. His hand began to move and Bruce Lee closed the gap. 8 feet. In a normal confrontation, 8 feet is considered a safe distance. Enough space to react, enough time to respond. Every security professional, every bodyguard, every man who has ever carried a weapon knows this calculation instinctively. The older man knew it, too. He had spent decades in a world where such measurements meant the difference between life and death. 8 feet with a hand already on the gun. The math was simple. He would win. But Bruce Lee did not operate by normal calculations. The movement that followed would be analyzed and debated for years afterward by martial artists, combat specialists, and those few witnesses who saw fragments of what happened that night. Some called it impossible. Others called it the perfect expression of what Bruce had been developing in isolation. A system built not on tradition, but on the relentless elimination of everything unnecessary. No wasted motion, no telegraphing, no gap between intention and action. The older man's hand had just cleared his jacket when Bruce reached him. There was no dramatic leap, no spinning technique, no Hollywood moment. Just an explosion of forward movement. What Bruce would later describe in his private notes as the straight line being the shortest distance between 2 points. His left hand intercepted the gun arm at the wrist, redirecting it outward and down in a single fluid motion. The weapon discharged, a deafening crack in the small room, but the bullet buried itself harmlessly in the floor. In the same instant, Bruce's right palm struck the man's chest. It was not a punch, not in any conventional sense. It was something Bruce had been perfecting for years, a short-range strike that generated enormous force through the coordination of the entire body. He called it the 1-inch punch, though in this case the distance was perhaps 3 inches. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The older man's feet left the ground. Not dramatically, perhaps 6 inches of lift, but enough. He flew backward, crashing into the wall behind him with a sound like a bag of wet cement hitting concrete. The gun clattered from his grip, spinning across the floor. He slid down the wall, gasping, his hands clutching his sternum. His eyes were wide with something that had finally replaced his professional calm. Fear, pure and absolute. Bruce stood over him, not even breathing hard. 12 seconds, he said quietly. That's how long you had to change your minds. You chose poorly. The room was silent, except for the groaning of the 2 men on the floor and the older man's ragged attempts to draw breath. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat, and something else, the sharp, metallic scent of violence that lingers after the body recognizes how close it has come to death. Bruce bent down and picked up the gun. He examined it briefly. A compact revolver, well-maintained, the weapon of someone who expected to use it, then released the cylinder and let the remaining bullets fall to the floor like metal rain. He placed the empty gun on the table. "I'm going to leave now," he said, "and you're going to deliver a message to whoever sent you here tonight." The older man looked up at him, still struggling to breathe, his hand pressed against his chest where a bruise was already forming beneath his shirt. "Tell them that Bruce Lee is not a problem to be solved. Tell them that I came to Hong Kong to make films, not enemies. But if they want enemies—" He paused, and something in his expression shifted, a coldness that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "Tell them I am the worst enemy they could possibly make." He turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, the first bodyguard had managed to push himself to his knees, still clutching his throat. His face a deep purple as he fought for each breath. The second had not moved at all, his broken wrist bent at an angle that made the shape of his arm look wrong. "Alien." Bruce paused at the door. "One more thing," he said without turning around. "If I ever see any of you again, if I ever hear that someone connected to tonight has come within 100 feet of me or anyone I care about, what happened in this room will seem like a gentle warning." He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The waiter, who had been hovering nervously at the end of the corridor, would later tell friends that Bruce Lee walked past him like nothing had happened. Calm, composed, his suit unwrinkled, his hair still perfectly in place. Only his eyes betrayed anything, a darkness that the waiter would remember for the rest of his life. Like looking into the eyes of a tiger, he would say years later, after Bruce had become a legend. A tiger that had just decided to let you live. The stairwell was narrow and poorly lit. Bruce descended slowly, his footsteps echoing against concrete walls that smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew. Behind him, somewhere on the 3rd floor, he could still hear the muffled sounds of men in pain. He did not look back. His body moved with the same fluid control it always did. Each step measured, each movement precise. To anyone watching, he would have appeared completely calm. A man leaving a routine meeting, nothing more. But inside, something was different. Not fear. Not regret. Something closer to clarity. The kind that comes only after you have crossed a line you cannot uncross. He had hurt men before, in tournaments and challenge matches, in the controlled chaos of training. But this had been different. This had been absolute. He reached the ground floor and pushed open the service door that led to a back alley. The night air hit him warm, thick with humidity, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and street vendors, and a city that had no idea what had just happened 3 floors above. Bruce stopped. He looked down at his hands. They were steady, perfectly steady. Not a tremor, not a shake. The same hands that had shattered a man's wrist, collapsed another's throat, driven a third into a wall with force enough to crack plaster. He flexed his fingers slowly, watching the tendons move beneath the skin. This is what I am, he thought. This is what I have made myself. The realization carried no pride, no satisfaction, only a cold, clear understanding that he had built himself into something that could not be undone. A weapon does not get to choose when it is used, can only choose to be ready. He walked through the alley onto a main street, past neon signs advertising restaurants and fortune tellers and tailors who could make a suit in 24 hours. The city swirled around him. Lovers arguing, children chasing each other, old men playing chess under street lamps. And none of them knew. None of them could see what he carried inside him. The taxi ride home took 40 minutes. Bruce sat in the back seat, watching the lights of Kowloon give way to the quieter streets of their neighborhood. The driver attempted conversation twice and gave up both times. When he reached the apartment, it was past midnight. He unlocked the door silently, slipped off his shoes, and moved through the darkness with the ease of someone who had memorized every obstacle, every creaking floorboard. Linda was asleep. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a long moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She looked peaceful, untouched by the world he had just come from. He did not wake her. Instead, he walked to the small balcony of their living room and stood there, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, 3 men were being taken to hospitals. Somewhere out there, powerful people were receiving phone calls that would make them very, very angry. And somewhere inside himself, Bruce Lee was making a decision. He would not run. He would not hide. He would not apologize for what he was or what he had done. He would walk straight into the heart of this industry, this city, this world that thought it could intimidate him, and he would burn so bright that no one would ever dare to touch him again. The night was silent. The city glittered below like scattered diamonds. Bruce stood alone on the balcony until dawn began to break over Hong Kong. Then he went inside to train. The news spread through Hong Kong's underworld like a virus. Not through newspapers, this was not the kind of story that appeared in print. Not through official channels. The men who had arranged that meeting had no interest in involving the police. It spread the way such stories always spread in that world. Through whispers, through glances, through the sudden silence that fell whenever Bruce Lee's name was mentioned in certain rooms. 3 men exposed, humiliated, broken. And the people who had sent them were furious. In the days that followed, Bruce continued his work as if nothing had happened. He attended meetings. He demonstrated techniques for film producers who were slowly beginning to understand that this young man from America might be something more than a novelty. He trained alone in the early mornings, pushing his body through routines that would have hospitalized most professional athletes. But those who knew him truly noticed a change. Linda, his wife, saw it first. The way he checked the windows before sleeping. The way his eyes swept every room they entered, cataloging exits, measuring distances. The way he positioned himself in restaurants with his back to the wall, facing the door. "Something happened," she said one night, 3 days after the incident. They were in their small apartment, the children already asleep. "You're not going to tell me what it was, are you?" Bruce was silent for a long moment. "There are people in this city," he finally said, "who believe that power comes from fear, from violence, for making others feel small. He turned to look at her, and his expression was difficult to read. I showed them that they were wrong, and now they have to decide what to do about that. Are we in danger? The question hung in the air between them. No, Bruce said, but there was something in the way he said it, a hardness, a certainty that made the word feel less like reassurance and more like a promise. A promise that if danger came, he would be ready. What Linda did not know, what almost no one knew, was that Bruce had already begun making preparations. He reached out to contacts from his years in San Francisco and Los Angeles, men who understood the intersection of martial arts and the less visible aspects of society. Men who could provide information about the organization that had sent those 3 bodyguards, about its leadership, about its vulnerabilities. The information that came back was troubling. The organization was not simply a collection of criminals. It was a network deeply embedded in Hong Kong's film industry, its shipping businesses, its real estate development. Its leaders were not street thugs, but businessmen, politicians, men whose names appeared on charity boards and in society columns. And they were not accustomed to being defied. Within a week of the incident, Bruce began to notice things. A car that appeared too often on his street. A man reading a newspaper in the same cafe 3 mornings in a row. A telephone call to his apartment that consisted only of silence. Then a click. They were watching him, measuring him, deciding. Bruce responded in the only way he knew how. He trained harder. His notebooks from this period reveal an almost obsessive focus on what he called combat reality. Stripping away everything that did not serve the singular purpose of ending a fight as quickly and decisively as possible. He analyzed his performance in that room, identifying moments where he could have been faster, more efficient, more final. The 3 men were not skilled, he wrote in one entry. They relied on intimidation, on the assumption that their target would be paralyzed by fear. This is a weakness that can be exploited. But what happens when the opponent is skilled? What happens when there are 5 instead of 3? What happens when the attack comes without warning? He began to develop scenarios, mental exercises in which he faced multiple attackers in confined spaces, armed opponents, situations where retreat was impossible. He would lie awake at night running through these scenarios until the responses became automatic, until his body could react without waiting for his mind to catch up. Linda watched this transformation with growing concern. "You're becoming someone else," she told him one evening, watching him practice strikes against a wooden dummy with an intensity that bordered on violence. "This isn't the man I married." Bruce stopped. His chest heaved. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the wooden floor. "The man you married," he said quietly, "was living in a different world, a world where skill was enough, where being the best meant being safe." He wiped his face with a towel. "That world doesn't exist here. Maybe it never existed anywhere." He looked at her, and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. "I'm not becoming someone else, Linda. I'm becoming who I need to be to protect you, to protect the children, to build something that no one can take away from us." 2 weeks after the incident, the decision came. The message arrived not through violence, but through silk. A gift box delivered to Bruce's apartment by a courier who disappeared before anyone could question him. Inside, wrapped in red fabric, was a jade pendant. An antique piece, clearly valuable, the kind of object that carried weight far beyond its material worth. There was no note, no explanation. But Bruce understood immediately. In the language of Hong Kong's hidden powers, jade was not merely a gift. It was an offering, a gesture of recognition. And red silk, the color of fortune, of celebration, of blood, meant that the matter was being put to rest. They had decided not to pursue him. Linda found him standing in the kitchen, holding the pendant up to the morning light. His expression was unreadable. "What is it?" she asked. "A peace offering," Bruce said. "Or a test. I'm not sure which." "From the people who?" Yes. She moved closer, studying the pendant. It was beautiful. A dragon coiled around a pearl, carved with extraordinary detail. The craftsmanship was old, perhaps a century or more. What does it mean? Bruce set the pendant down on the counter. He did not look at it again. It means they've calculated the cost of coming after me again. And they've decided it's too high. He paused. For now. The weeks that followed brought an uneasy calm. The watching eyes disappeared or became better at hiding. The silent phone calls stopped. Bruce moved through Hong Kong's film industry with growing momentum, his reputation expanding with each demonstration, each meeting, each whispered story about what had happened in that room in Kowloon. But something had changed in the way people treated him. Before the incident, he had been seen as talented but arrogant. A foreigner, really too American, too loud, too unwilling to observe the proper hierarchies. Studio executives had humored him. Directors had been curious but skeptical. The established martial arts community had viewed him with open hostility. Now, there was something else in their eyes when they looked at him. Respect, yes, but also wariness. The recognition that Bruce Lee was not simply a skilled fighter or an ambitious actor. He was something more dangerous, a man who could not be controlled through the usual mechanisms of fear and obligation. The film offers began to change. Where before he had been offered supporting roles, the villain's henchman, the hero's ethnic friend, the exotic threat to be defeated in the third act. Now producers began to discuss starring vehicles. Not because they liked him, not because they believed in his vision, but because they understood on some primal level that Bruce Lee was going to become something significant, and they wanted to be attached to that rise. Raymond Chow was one of the first to truly understand. A former executive at Shaw Brothers, Chow had recently founded his own production company, Golden Harvest. He was ambitious, shrewd, and possessed of an instinct for talent that had made him wealthy. When he requested a meeting with Bruce, it was not through intermediaries or formal channels. He came himself to Bruce's training space and watched in silence for 20 minutes as Bruce worked through a routine. When Bruce finally stopped, Chow did not applaud, did not offer empty compliments. He simply nodded once and said, "I heard what happened in Kowloon." Bruce wiped his face with a towel. "A lot of people have heard a lot of things. I heard that 3 men tried to intimidate you and ended up in a hospital. I heard that one of them still can't turn his head properly. I heard that the people who sent them decided it was cheaper to send you Jade than to send more men." Bruce said nothing. "I also heard," Chow continued, "that you have a vision for martial arts cinema that no one in this industry understands. That you want to show fighting as it really is. Not the opera nonsense we've been producing for decades, but something real. Something that audiences have never seen before. And what do you think about that?" Chow smiled. It was not a warm smile, but it was genuine. "I think that the man who can do what you did in that room, and then walk out like he was leaving a business meeting, is exactly the man who can revolutionize this industry. I think you're going to become the biggest star Hong Kong has ever produced. And I think I want to be the one who helps you do it." It was the beginning of a partnership that would change cinema forever. But Bruce never forgot the jade pendant, never forgot what it represented. He kept it in a drawer in his study, wrapped in its original red silk, a reminder that his success was built not only on talent and vision, but on a night when 3 men learned that some problems cannot be solved with violence. Or rather, that some men are better at violence than anyone imagined possible. Years later, when Bruce Lee had become a name that echoed across continents, interviewers would sometimes ask him about fear. Had he ever been afraid? Had he ever faced a moment where he doubted himself, where the outcome seemed uncertain? Bruce would smile at these questions, that enigmatic half-smile that photographers loved and journalists found impossible to read. "Fear," he would say, "is not the enemy. Hesitation is. Fear tells you that something matters. Hesitation is what gets you killed." He never spoke publicly about what happened in Kowloon. Never mentioned the 3 bodyguards, the private room, the 12 seconds that had established his reputation in ways no film ever could. When pressed about rumors, and there were always rumors, he would deflect with philosophy or change the subject entirely. But those closest to him knew. Linda knew. She had seen the jade pendant in his drawer and understood without being told that it represented something her husband would carry forever. Raymond Chow knew. He had built an empire partly on the foundation of that night, on the understanding that Bruce Lee was not merely an actor playing a fighter, but something far more authentic and far more dangerous. And somewhere in Hong Kong 3 men knew. The oldest of them, the one with the calm eyes who had threatened Bruce with real violence, never fully recovered from the chest injury. He retired from his profession within a year, plagued by breathing problems that doctors could never fully explain. Those who knew him said he refused to watch martial arts films for the rest of his life. The one whose wrist had been shattered underwent multiple surgeries. The joint never healed correctly. He could still use the hand for simple tasks, but the precision required for his former work was gone forever. The largest of the 3, the one who had charged first and fallen first, suffered permanent damage to his throat. His voice, once deep and commanding, became a perpetual rasp, a constant reminder of the moment he had underestimated a man half his size. None of them ever spoke about that night. Not to police, not to journalists, not even to each other. Some lessons are too painful to revisit. Bruce Lee died in 1973 at the age of 32. The official cause was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain that took him without warning, without battle, without the chance to fight back. He left behind for completed films, a philosophy that would influence generations, and a legend that grew larger with each passing year. But for those who truly understood his journey, for those who knew what happened before the fame, before the films, before the world learned his name, the legend had begun earlier. It had begun in a small room in Kowloon. 12 seconds. 3 men who thought they understood violence, and 1 man who showed them how wrong they were.